Hi, my name is Marissa Lamagna, and in 2008, I started Bay Area Green Tours. During the last 12 years, I've had the privilege of learning from so many change makers, thought leaders, and what I like to call solutionaries all around the Bay Area. As a result of the pandemic, we had to stop doing tours. In some ways, it's a silver lining because now we're able to connect to some of the people that we've learned from and share them outside of our backyard with people from all over the world. Bay Area Green Tours is a small grassroots organization. After the pandemic, people came to help us pivot and reinvent ourselves. I'd like to begin to compensate them as we continue to look for new ways to sustain our work. We appreciate it if you could make a donation, share our programming, and come back for the next time for Solutionaries Speak. In 2019, I did a permaculture training with Vital Cycles with Lydia Nielsen and Anne Freiwald. I learned so much from her. She is our moderator for Solutionaries Speak. I'll turn it over to Anne now. And thank you for joining. Please share this video and stay tuned for our new programming.
Wonderful. What a wonderful video. Well, welcome everyone today for our July Solutionaries Speak. We are so thrilled to have Willow Summer with us from Three Springs Farm in Bodega. Welcome, Willow. We want to thank Marissa also for just even having us with Bay Area Green Tours and all the great work that you've been doing for so many years and bringing people together. And so we want to set some context. We're going to be talking about biodynamics today beyond organics. But before we go into that conversation and that discussion with Willow, we are going to look at a brief video that our video team, the amazing Maya, Elizabeth, and Dennis, known as Baggett Lens, have created. They went up and visited Willow with Anna Topol, another colleague, and made a wonderful video just to give you the context and for Willow and where she is. So here we go.
Three Springs Community Farm is a biodynamic community farm. We are about an 80-acre property. In addition to growing the vegetables and having some dairy products from our goats, we also do some other livestock like pigs, and we're hoping in the coming years to do more, value-added things that our membership would like, such as herbs or spices, that type of thing. We also have school group visits, and then we also have an apprenticeship program in biodynamic farming, which is for young adults or really anybody of any age who wants to consider farming as something that they're really going to be doing. I started farming when I was 13, actually. I had to get my parents' signature. My parents blessed me with their wonderful upbringing in the hippie culture. So all the DIY stuff, learning about food. I always grew a garden with my dad. So that's how I really gained a love of gardening. When we garden with somebody we care about, it really makes it something that we just want to do more. We grow using biodynamic methods, which is organic plus. Honestly, when I look at the farm that we're running today and I think about what I was doing at 13, it's honestly not that different.
Got some beautiful cucumbers growing here. This is a perfect place to show you some of the techniques that they're using here. Here at the ends of the rows, they have flowers growing. And what this does is it really brings in that healthy biodiversity. So we're attracting pollinators and beneficial insects that will then help balance out the system and manage harmful insects. This is another technique. You'll see this is fencing. And what we've done is we've created this sort of archway of fencing along this bed to allow the cucumbers to grow up and over. So the plants actually can grow over this nice structure. The cucumbers will then be hanging down from above and be more protected. There still will be some insects that are harmful, but it will be all in balance and the plants will still be able to survive and thrive.
I, along the way, became really devoted to biodynamic agriculture. I felt like I was doing that style of farming all along, just kind of not really knowing the history. And so here's the book. So I recommend that everybody find this book and read it. It opened up a whole world for me. Biodynamic agriculture just brings all of these threads together for me because It's an economic theory, it's a social theory, it's an environmental theory, and it also brings a worldview that is not materialistic, that says every part of our world is actually alive and imbued with being. Farming is a vehicle to work together towards the kind of society that we want to be in, one where human beings are treated more fairly. It just didn't make sense to me why somebody who sits at a desk, would get all the money, and somebody who works really hard to, grow food would not. So what the biodynamic method says about the economic model is for the producers and the consumers to get together and form an association to meet the needs of the community. They have to understand that if we keep behaving that way, the environment is going to keep getting harmed, the people are going to keep getting harmed. I feel like what we're all doing is trying to create a better world together.
Wonderful. Well, Willow, you have a beautiful place up there in Bodega.
Thank you.
Can you talk to us? We just start off hearing about how you found your place here on this gorgeous property and doing your biodynamics there.
Oh yeah, that I would love to talk about that. I was also thinking maybe I could read a little verse from Steiner, Rudolf Steiner, who's the grandfather of biodynamic agriculture, that really is a great jumping off place, if you don't mind.
Oh my gosh.
Great. Okay. And this is what we share together when we have our regional biodynamic meetings. So we always say this: seek the truly practical material life, but seek it in such a way that it does not numb you to the spirit that works within it. Seek the spirit, but not out of spiritual lust or spiritual egoism. Seek it rather because you wish to become selfless in the practical life of the material world. Turn to the ancient principle: spirit never without matter, matter never without spirit. And say to yourselves, we will do everything material in the light of the spirit. And we will seek the light of the spirit in such a way that it enkindles warmth in us for our practical deeds. And that was written by Rudolf Steiner, who we'll talk more about later. And I just want to say hi to anybody I know who's on today. I know there's probably some friends.
Got some fans out there.
Yeah, and old friends probably. And of course, thanks to you and Marissa and everyone else at Bay Area Green Tours. It's really wonderful what you're doing. So yeah, how did we come here to this land? I think it's, of course, important to say that this land is stolen land. It was Miwok land. And where we live, the ranch is just like 5 minutes from the little town of Bodega. And that was a pretty important settlement during those times. And so, between like the 1730s or 50s, when the Spanish came and developed the mission system, and then up through the 1830s or 50s, this was a really difficult, terrible time of colonization and disease and losing land, losing livelihood, being enslaved. We still, the community is still here. Obviously, the numbers lower than before colonization, but I just think it's important for us to think about that and think about how this still is indigenous land, even though they unfortunately don't have the access that they should. And so we'd like to, see changes happen with that over time in our community. I think that would be a really important, for us, it's an important thing to be asking ourselves about. And, we've made the space available to people in that community who would want to come and harvest here or whatever. So we own the land with 2 other families, and I don't really believe in land ownership, I have to say, but that's the way that our legal system works. And so we feel like we are stewarding the land. We're responsible for tending it, but we feel like that should be a community endeavor. I mean, it doesn't really make sense that one person could own, it's an 80-acre property. Plus, how can you own Mother Earth? So come on, people, that's crazy. That's crazy
Okay.
talk. So anyhow, when I was doing urban farming and educational work in the Bay Area, East Bay for many years. And I grew up in Sonoma County, and I just wanted to come back. I just felt like I want to be in the countryside again. So we got together with 2 other families to purchase this ranch, and then I wanted to start another CSA farm. You know, I've started a number of different operations. So that's we were very lucky to partner up with others, and a lot of people are doing that now. How do you get access to land? You know, you got to do it as a community because it's too expensive.
Yeah. And as you say in the video too, when you work on the land with people that you care about, right, it just makes you want to do it more. So yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Absolutely.
And so you've been gardening since you were 13. You started with your dad. You mentioned that and the gift that was to be able to grow up with this knowledge and the sharing of wisdom from your family. And so then you mentioned that you came to biodynamics. You want to just talk a little bit more about what window that was that opened for you to biodynamics and how it changed the work that you were doing.
Yeah, sure. So I started gardening when I was probably like the first walk with my dad, but then I got my first real farming job when I was 13, working on a 5-acre organic production farm, which was really what I wanted to do. I was always interested in food. I was always interested in social justice, and just had a deep feeling that, you know, food should be a right for everybody. So I just wanted to be involved with food since I was really young. And I did end up, you know, after college getting into farming, doing urban farming, as I mentioned, for many years, along with many other people in the East Bay who, you know, we did a lot of fun work together in West Oakland, trying to bring more food access to that community, working with long-term residents who actually had a wealth of farming and gardening knowledge. It just didn't necessarily have access to land or supplies. And so through City Slicker Farms, we did a lot of great stuff with that. And I feel really lucky to have been a part of that. And so I guess I would say, you know, in the 2000s around, well, in 2003, I was injured at one of the anti-war protests, and it was kind of like a dark night of the soul for me. It was a big crisis health-wise. I had a lot of medical issues I had to go through. And at that point, it was like, you know, I'd been really working in social justice and farming, and it was very political. And all of a sudden, it was like kind of having a bit of a near-death experience where I just all of a sudden felt like, where is the spirit? I need to connect with more spirituality. And so at that point, I kind of sought out, you know, tried to find ways to connect. And then I realized I had gone to Waldorf School, which is another offshoot of Rudolf Steiner's work and Waldorf education. But, you know, when you go to a Waldorf school, they don't really tell you the underpinnings of it. So I just knew I had learned how to cook and sew and knit and, you know, do all this fun stuff. And so I thought, oh, what's that all about? And so I went back to school to become a Waldorf teacher, and also wanted to study biodynamic agriculture. The farming that we do in California that's organic agriculture does have a basis in biodynamic farming, because many of you know about Alan Chadwick, who is kind of a patron saint of sustainable farming in California, as he was, you know, the impetus for a number of projects here that a lot of people who got trained up in organic farming have kind of been influenced by or come through, such as the UC Santa Cruz training program, as well as Willow and the Zen Center Garden and a lot of these things. So yeah, the techniques I had learned were really biodynamics practices without kind of the more spiritual aspects. So I really wanted to get that part under my belt and learn more about that. So I studied with Harold Hoven in Fair Oaks, New Sacramento. Have you met Harold?
I have, yes.
Yeah, so Harold's great. Yeah, he's amazing. And so I did a year-long workshop series with him, I think in 2011. You know, I'd been in a career of farming for years, but I brought in, then I got to learn how do we use the recommendations that Steiner had for healing the earth through the biodynamic preparations and some of the practices. that honestly had kind of, Alan's students, a lot of them, some of them did all that stuff. And a lot of them, it kind of dropped out, like, these more esoteric spiritual aspects fell away. And so I was really thirsty to learn that and to bring that back into my farming practice.
Beautiful. And so what were some of the first direct changes or new strategies that you started implementing right away?
Yeah, well, some of them are, which I'd like to talk about in a little bit, are a little bit in the realm of worldview, or just holding things in a different system of thought, which I think is very important, because the way we think, we have beliefs, we have thoughts, and then we create our world, right? I mean, our thoughts and our beliefs are what drives it all. And so some of those things I was able to just really learn this amazing system of thought, worldview, a different, ontology, really. And then on the practical level, we just have a lot of practices, such as the biodynamic preparations, which are herbal substances that get added to the compost piles, and then also some other natural substances that we prepare in particular ways. And then the end result is a field spray, which gets sprayed on the crops regularly. And so those I would say are the main areas. There's kind of the thinking, the worldview, and then there's the social realm that Steiner brought new ideas around how do we organize ourselves socially, and then the actual, kind of practical practices that we do. And all three of those are really important.
Well, I think in the video you mentioned, and I'm going to go back because you have an activist background, which is my background as well, which also brought me into organics, and that, food is a right, and healing the planet and healing ourselves. And you mentioned that that biodynamics is more than just farming. It's an economic, social, and environmental theory, right? And worldview. So I love that you came from this activist place, and bringing that in, and then grounding your practices in spirituality and that need to actually have a meaningful connection with the land. And so through that, can you talk about what the preparations, I always find it, I'd love to hear your take on just the roots behind those preparations and what they're meant to do.
Yeah, great. Yes, totally. And I think it's what I always recommend to people is, we can talk about all this stuff, these practical just actions that we can do. And I think it's also a really good idea to go visit a biodynamic farm and do it. And Steiner said that in the agriculture course. You're not going to learn this, we can talk about it and try to understand it, but it's through doing it that you're really going to understand and learn. And so it's really the experience. Even just to visit a biodynamic farm, even if you don't do any of these practices, I always recommend that people visit, because you might feel and sense something different. And that's really, the proof is in the pudding for me. The proof is in, what is it like on this farm? What do I feel? And it might be on a little bit of a subtle level, but you'll see and experience something different. And so I think that's really important. Also, I want to mention that gardeners can do these things too. You don't have to have a big farming operation. And it would be really important for the world if more and more gardeners started to use some of these practices. So a foundational idea is that Steiner brought is that, and it's obvious now, he was teaching the agriculture course in 1924. So think to how times were then. And his students who learned at that point and also developed together as a working group some of these practices, they actually did have a big influence in the world. And a lot of their ideas and practices have gone out into the world for the last 100 years almost. But it wasn't always with the name biodynamic. Things started to trickle in different ways. So I think the roots of it are really much broader than we know. But so one thing Steiner said is that the essential activity of farming is depleting the earth. We are taking when we farm. We are removing. We are exploiting, one could even say. And so he started out by saying that is the reality of farming. That is what it is. It is not to put a pretty picture on it, the forest or the meadow, that is an ecosystem imbalance. And when we're farming, that is not a forest or a meadow. Let's just face it, And so what his practices were really to replenish, put back what it is we're taking on some level, in many ways, both physical and spiritual. So so they are mostly herbal substances that would be well known as medicinal herbs that human beings use also. And so these herbs are prepared in a special way and then put into the compost pile. Now they work not on a materialistic level of like, we have to put X amount of this substance on our fields, because Steiner talks about substances and forces, it's not just matter, there's also forces. Now, in our times, we may have an idea for that. Yes, we know we have energy. We know, there's forces in the world. There's gravity. What are forces? There's lots of different ways to think about forces. But the way we tend to approach farming from our scientific worldview is very mechanized and very materialistic. So we mostly think, well, I have to put on X pounds of nitrogen or whatever. In Steiner's picture of agriculture, it's not just a substance, it's also a force. And so when we're putting these herbal substances like dandelion into the compost pile, we only need to put a little bit, because the actual energy of the dandelion will spread through the pile to the material that's in the compost pile. And then you put that compost on the field, and now you have this dandelion imprint. Whatever medicine the dandelion brings us, it is now brought to the field as a medicine. So we have dandelion, yarrow, oak bark, valerian, chamomile, and nettles. And what did I forget? Anything? I don't know. There's those are the ones. And except for oak bark, these are well-known medicinal herbs. And so if anyone's interested in working with these preparations, a couple of ways you can do it is, number one, you can go to our regional biodynamic group, which is called Be Dank or Be Dense, depending on whether you want to be in the bog or flitting about in the fields. And that's BDANC, and the website is bdanc.org. You can get in touch with Harold, who kind of is the person who organizes and collectivizes our preparation making, so that we can get it out to the community. So you can purchase it there. The price is just helps cover the costs that we have to make the preparations. And so if you want to put some of these in your compost pile, just get in touch with Harold. He can get you these prepared substances. Most of them are actually aged for a year, often in different kinds of animal organs. So we could look at this idea of forces and see that our organs actually have a function within the body. And the form, maybe some of you have heard this idea of form equals function. Within the form of the organ, there's an actual effect that comes about. The bladder, the heart, the intestines, they all perform an amazing function within the human body or animals. And so what we do is we utilize these organs, put the herbs inside of them, and then bury them in the earth. This really quickly has to get very cosmic, because what I'm saying, I mean, because why do we do that? Well, we don't just live in we don't just live here on planet Earth. We live in the world. The world consists of a solar system. And in this worldview, cosmology of Steiner's, the planets of the solar system, the sun, the moon, the inner planets, the outer planets, even the stars, have forces which influence life on Earth. And it's not, in materialistic science, it's just gravity, that's all. But in our worldview, there's actually more subtle forces. So when we put things into these organs, we bury them in the earth, like say, we put the yarrow blossoms in a bladder of a stag. So you got to have friends who are hunters. And then you put it in, you hang it up in the sun for a number of months, and then you bury it in the earth at the fall equinox and let that age in the earth for the rest of the year. And then you dig that up, and then you put this small amount in your compost pile. So it's a little bit like homeopathy. You could also say there's different analogies that can help us to understand it.
Yeah.
But the essential idea is it's herbal medicine for the earth, because we take and take and take.
Right.
And so let's give.
Yeah, and at the time,
And
when
then sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, because at the time when Steiner came up with these practices, I think it's, I always like to note that in the 1920s, the soil was depleted to a point where they were afraid that they weren't going to be able to feed anyone, right? So the soil was so depleted, they weren't getting sources of nitrogen that they had been having access to. So the farmers sort of came and said, well, what are we going to do next? So,
Yeah.
you know, and so this was his solution based in some of science and alchemy and homeopathy. He brought together so many philosophies to create these practices that are really so lovely. And I just wanted to.
Yeah, and he was also foreseeing the advent of chemical agriculture. And he says in the agriculture course, his talks on agriculture, that is going to lead to sure destruction. And unfortunately, that was at the beginning of it. And unfortunately, we did go down the path because a lot of these, practices in chemical agriculture were a direct outgrowth of the war machines. Especially World War I, when chemical warfare started to be developed, and then, nitrate, which ended up becoming fertilizer that you could manufacture. Chemistry was being discovered, how you could actually synthesize all these things. Right. But, so he was really addressing that in the agriculture course, because they were at a crossroads of like, well, like you said, we need the fertility. So, we can just synthesize chemicals. Great. So he was really cautioning against that. And thank God, because if we didn't have that stream of organic agriculture, which was an outgrowth of biodynamic agriculture from Steiner's talks in the 20s, then, where would we be today? It'd be a lot worse, actually. Probably. So, but an important note is, you don't stop putting manure or compost on your fields just because you have these herbal substances. So you do both, because you also still need the fertility that comes from manure.
Yeah. And just what I also found out recently is that biodynamic farms in the United States are actually increasing right now, that there are more people turning to biodynamic farming. So, I was introduced to biodynamics when I lived in Germany back in 1995 for about 3 years. And I went there, and I'm the, eating organic. I showed up with my little to-go mug, and they didn't have to go actually back then. You actually had to stay where you were and drink it, anyway. So I went to the local place, and there was all this Demeter, right? They all called it, Demeter, but Demeter in German. And I would ask people, and then depending on which community you were in, you'd get a really different explanation for what the Demeter classification was for food. Some people would be like, it's no different than organic. They just just costs more. And then other people would really go into it. So, I did what you did, and I went to our local biodynamic farm and did feel something different. As you were saying, there's just such a different flow and different life energy in the soil and the animals and the people that were working there. But yeah, just so great that biodynamics is actually becoming, I guess it's not so mainstream, but it's definitely on the rise. And so good for
and also it's had a huge, it is growing, and it's had a huge surge in India, because in India, the culture still has a spiritual worldview, unlike in the West, where we have, basically scientism is what I would call it, a materialistic scientific worldview that's very disconnected in my view, although of course there are many great things from science. So it's on the uptick in India, and I think that one thing that I feel is so true for us in the West is that we kind of, our own personal lives have these pieces that are very difficult to bring together into a whole. It's like we can have, these, we could feel like, oh, why are things so terrible here? Why is our civilization having all these problems? Why am I having these problems in my personal life? You know, why do I feel like I can't figure out how to fit in or like do what my life purpose is in the world, because I have to go make money, or I have, you know, how do I figure out my life, and why do I feel depressed or anxious, or, you know, these different things, and why are we experiencing all these problems? And so I think, you know, when I mentioned earlier this idea about worldview, it's like, I think we really need to reevaluate and understand that it goes very deep into everything here. And in our Western civilization, that, you know, we need to bring all these problems together and start to see that they are all coming from the same root, which is a materialistic worldview that says that all that exists is what I can touch, hear, you know, smell, just with my basic senses, and that's it. There's nothing else. And I think that's really a dead end. And I think a lot of other people are coming to that view. You could get at it through a lot of other, there are still intact indigenous cultures and worldviews in the world. A lot of people get attracted to, you know, indigenous spirituality or various different forms that are still luckily thriving in the world. But that can sometimes feel a little bit like cultural appropriation. And the great thing about Rudolf Steiner's perspective is he's coming out of a European tradition. And he was talking to European people who had gone through this process of materialism to the point where in the mid 1800s, you know, it's just at its highest level ever, where religion is basically on the wane, and you know, there's really in a way it's a dead end culture where do you go from that? And so within his perspective, there's a lot of richness that I think we can have a renaissance. So I'm really glad to hear that more people are getting involved.
Yeah, I was very happy to hear that. And so you mentioned in the video the biodynamics being organic plus plus. So we've talked about the preps and different things, and obviously the spiritual piece and having the meaningful relationship with the land, right? It's not just about what you can do with the land, but what the land is wanting to do, right? Can you, what did I want to, I had so many things I wanted to ask you and follow up with you on that. Can you speak to some of the other practices? Like, for example, I thought it was really, I was rereading through everything leading up to having this conversation today, just that, you know, so everything that organics has, biodynamics has as well. And then in addition, what I loved is that, you know, 50% of the livestock feed on a biodynamic farm has to come from the farm itself, right? So this whole idea of on-site resources and cycling. And so as you were saying, instead of depleting it, always being actually producing and not bringing in from the outside what you can already be doing. And the other one I loved was that 10% of the total acreage has to be dedicated to biodiversity and sustaining and regenerating other populations like pollinators and birds, and actually predator-prey relationships, which I loved. Are there any other things like that people might get, that lights me up? So I think other people might like to.
Totally. In terms of the practices, so a really important part is that in biodynamics, we see each farm as a living entity. And that's a little bit of a difficult maybe thing to wrap your mind around. We don't mean like, oh, it's alive or there's plants alive on the land or something. We mean that there's an actual personality, an actual being, a person. The farm is a person. It's a person, just like we are made up of all different levels of organisms within us. We could even think of our different organs, or obviously we know we have microbes that we're symbiotic within our bodies, but the farm itself is a being. And it's not a being that's just a two-dimensional on the surface of the planet, but goes down into the center of the earth and up into the heavens. So it's more like, almost like a pie slice. You know, it gets very, very esoteric in a way, or just very different. And so, you know, when we look at ecosystem health, it's almost like, you know, you wouldn't cut out, I can't like cut out my circulatory part of my circulatory system and still expect to live, you know? And so the farm also has to have forest or meadows or, you know, obviously the waterways and water systems, all the different kinds of birds and animals, amphibians, all of these different creatures to be healthy. And it just is the height of insanity for us to think anything else. I mean, I think all of us, right? We all can see that this is actually how things are, that the land has an integrity to it that needs to be held. And so, you know, we need all of that. And so that is built into the Demeter standards.
Yeah.
If you become certified. And the question that we often hold is like, well, what if the farm is an organism or an entity? What is the farm entity? Like, we have 80 acres of property. That's like a map on a piece of paper. It's not the actual kind of integral ecosystem of the land that we're on. That actually extends maybe up to the ridges where the water starts to flow or whatever. So maybe it means that to honor this entity, we need to get together with our neighbors and then, you know, the goal is to be as self-reliant as you can be. So to produce as many of your inputs as you can on your own farm. And in the agriculture course, Steiner says that outright, but says, obviously it can't be 100%. That's impossible. But the more we do that, the more we kind of individualize our farm and the more our farm can become what its destiny is to become. Because he says that when we bring materials in to our farm, we're doing that because it's a sick organism, you know, and we can't survive without inputs from outside. So if we were able to produce our farming inputs from the farm itself, that would be a well farm organism. It would be a healthy farm. And so that's a wonderful thing to try to think about. It's the artistry of each farmer to really go, gosh, what you have to observe and be like, what does this land need? What is appropriate? And so, you know, we're looking at our land and how many goats can we have on our land to graze? How can we grow the hay or the fodder for our own goats instead of buying hay in? How can we, like, we have a breed of pigs that don't eat grain, they're just grazers. And we feed them, we do feed them alfalfa pellets, which we have to buy in. Well, we're getting this breed of pig because we have a lot of plants that they can graze, but we don't have land to grow grain. So let's not have animals that need grain. Let's leave that to the Midwestern people or whatever. We're looking at I just got seeds for this plant called Tagasaste, which is from Australia, New Zealand area. And it's like a perennial legume plant that they call it tree lucerne or tree alfalfa. So you can cut these branches and feed them, you know, to your animals for protein. So it really shares so much with permaculture, and permaculture and biodynamics really go hand in hand.
Yeah, they really
and very complementary.
Yeah.
And so I think that seeing the farm as an organism is one of the biggest ways to enter in. What I notice in my work over the last 20, 30 years is that there's a kind of tendency for people to talk a lot about best practices, or this is a model, you know, a model. And I just more and more feel like we need to be careful with that, because number one, things are portrayed as like, this is going to be the perfect solution for everyone. You know, and if we would just do this, then everything would be perfect, which to me kind of is fascist in a way. It's like, well, isn't that how we had a lot of, you know, the former Soviet Union, like oppressing all these people because we're just going to find the perfect system, you know, we get the system down and then that's it. I know it's coming out of a good place of wanting to solve problems, but I think it's really important for us to really understand that we do not have, each place is unique, each farm is unique, each community of people is unique, each culture is unique. Let's just actually allow ourselves the breathing room to say, I'm figuring out what's good here. And I don't have to go out and be like, now everybody else, I figured out what you should do. So that's a big part for me of that perspective. It's like, yeah, observe.
And that's one of the main permaculture principles as well, is to observe, right? And
Yeah.
we can do that so much better when we give ourselves the time. Beautiful. So
Yeah.
we wanted to talk, there's so much more we can be talking about. I wanted to make sure that we have time to talk about, I know that you just, since we met last, you hosted the Biodynamic Association of Northern California's solstice meeting up in Bodega on your farm, and wanted to just talk about that because I know some of the meetings I've been going to the January meetings for years because I love Dennis Klochek. I'm kind of a groupie and love to go up and see him. I missed this one up at your place, but just, I know that a lot of times the biodynamic preps are actually made at some of the meetings. And so that would be a really good way for people to get involved with the Biodynamic Association of Northern California. Also just with, getting their hands wet or in there with what those preparations are like, and experiencing what you've mentioned so many times about the different sense of being on a biodynamic farm. So do you want to speak some more to that?
Yeah, great. So I just want to invite all of you who are on the Zoom today, just personal invitation. Hello. You're invited and welcome to come to a meeting of the Biodynamic Association of Northern California. And as Anne said, we meet quarterly in January, and then in April, in July, and in September at the solstices and equinoxes, basically. And we make the preparations. And so the cool thing is that different farms will host the meetings. So it's a great way to get to go on a little field trip to a different farm. It's kind of like Bay Area Green Tours, except we all just go to some farm and we camp, and it'll be Friday to a Sunday morning. So, or Friday evening to Sunday morning. And you can camp at the farm. We do a potluck lunch now that COVID's maybe simmering down. And then there'll be like a catered meal of, maybe some local farms will put their produce together and have somebody cook dinner for the whole meeting. It could be like up to 80 people. Kids are welcome, and there'll be a tour of the farm and a chance to make these preparations, and also just network and get resources. And what I did want to talk a little bit too about kind of the social side and the economic side, if that's okay, Anne. Yeah, these meetings are a good example of part of the social side. But so Steiner gave some really interesting ideas around how we organize ourselves socially and economically, even in his time. And he died in 1925. So, but even in his time, he was seeing basically the effects of capitalism, I guess you could say, coupled with materialistic thinking. And I know I keep using that word, but I don't really mean by that word like, oh, I like to go shopping. It's more this idea that the material world is all that exists. There is no spiritual reality. So the coming together of capitalism and materialism, I would say, I'll just say that I think that's been a really bad thing for our world, and has resulted in a lot of really damaging practices, damaging social trends, etc. So his followers asked him, like, how could we do things differently, even back, in those times? And so his theories are not like idealistic. They're kind of like looking at just how things are and then how we could work ourselves into a better position. So he gave something which is called the fundamental social law. And what that says is that, and this is for our times where our civilizations are complicated enough that each person isn't just homesteading and growing everything they need for themselves. I mean, those times are over. We have a huge population. We have, more complicated society. So the fundamental social law is that we do not live by our own work, but we live by the work of others. Mm-hmm. If you think about that, I mean, we could just because I'm looking at the images of people on the Zoom, like every item of our clothing. I don't know, did anybody here make an item of their clothing? Maybe, probably not. That's a really good example. that we do not live by our own work, but we live by the work of others. And so because that's the reality, he said that we need to look at the way we organize ourselves differently. We need to have, let's say we have the economic sphere, which is, money, goods that we all need, things that we need to live. He said in that sphere, we need to have a feeling and a governing principle of interdependence or brotherhood and sisterhood. In the sphere of cultural life or artistic life, we need to have the ruling spirit of freedom. That's where we need freedom. I need to be able to do my art. You need to be able to do your art. I need to be able to have my own ideas, etc. Or, the freedom really should govern that. And that in the realm of our shared governance, we need to have equality. So equality is very important when it comes to everybody's rights. But unfortunately, what happens in capitalism is in the economic sphere, we apply what? Freedom. Think about that. I am free to exploit whatever I want and to make the money that I need. I can do whatever I want, and I don't care if it affects you. Yeah. So CSA farming really came out of Steiner's theories. And what it said is that if producers got together with consumers, people who need food, and formed an association to meet the needs of the community, then that would be equitable for all. And that association doesn't need to set a set price for the food. Some people could pay more, some people could pay less. And so that's what we do in our CSA is we have members and we say, here's the budget of the farm. The budget needs to be met by the members. Here's what it would be if we divided it equally. Now everybody just say, what do you want to pay? And then if all of those added together don't equal the budget, we go back and say, okay, we didn't make the budget. Who else can give more? And so this is a way that we could really, in our example, this is what we do. And so we're able to have low-income members and people who are burdened with a lot of money have a place to give more. Yeah, so that's in the social realm, I think, a really important aspect of biodynamic agriculture.
Absolutely. Well, we're heading out to the end of our conversation and wanting to open it up to questions, but I'm wondering if you wanted to talk about any of the books we discussed before today, or the Stella Natura calendar, which I know is, I can show mine, maybe I'll just plug it. So everything that Willow's been talking about, I found a really, it's not necessarily easy, but it's a really engaging way to get into not so much the preps, but really what she's talking about, the planetary and celestial influences and how that can, just in your little garden or your pot that you have in your balcony, when's the best time to plant or to, to do different activities in your garden or on your land. So do you want to speak to that? We talked about that a little bit.
Yeah, so just what you said, and the Stella Natura calendar, and there are others that are made. They're basically called the Biodynamic Planting Calendar or Gardening Calendar, and you can buy those online. Or from Steiner Books is a really great source to get all these books. And the calendar is so awesome because we do garden by the cycles of the moon, especially. The solar rhythms also are very important, obviously, the seasons and all of that. And then for animal husbandry, the zodiacal constellations are really important also. And so the calendar kind of puts that all together on one page so you can really track it. You can be like, well, when is the moon going to be full? Let me get my seeds in the ground. Or when is the moon going to be waning or new? Let me cut the grass and prune, because that's a good time to decrease growth is when the moon is waning. So highly recommend it. There's a lot of great books out there. So there's the agriculture course from Steiner, and we read it every year. It's really wonderful. I encourage you to read it. And then there are some other books like this one, which is a little bit like easier than the agriculture course, maybe, to kind of just penetrate into how it all works. This is a really good book, Biodynamic Manual by Pierre Masson. And then if you're interested in the social and economic aspect of how to organize agriculture according to Steiner's ideas, this book is really great. This was written by the people who started the first CSA in the United States, which did come out of biodynamic agriculture. I think there were like subscription services or collective farms that were existing before the biodynamic CSAs. So I'm not saying it's definitely the first in the nation, but this was a movement since the 80s. Farms of Tomorrow Revisited is really great. And I always want to come back to Alan Chadwick and his student, John Jevons, who wrote How to Grow More Vegetables.
It's a great one.
This is biodynamic farming at its best. It doesn't have the preparations or the moon cycles, but it has all the other aspects. Really foundational book that really made a huge difference in the world. If you're interested in like other topics, the holistic orchard. This is an amazing person who grows biodynamically, and you know, he's amazing, Michael Phillips. So that's if you want to do trees. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's so much more. And there is a book of the talks of Alan Chadwick, Performance in the Garden. He didn't write a book, but if you want to hear straight, Alan studied with Steiner. So it's really kind of straight from the horse's mouth, really fun, really, really esoteric. So yeah, those are some ideas of where to get more information, but I think the biodynamic associations are really a great, way to get involved. And then I'll just say right before questions, I know we want to get to that I have been able to co-author 2 books myself. One, I do garden teaching and farm-based education, so Growing Sustainable Children, with my collaborator, Ronnie Sands. And this is practical resource if you want to do gardening with children. And it's got all the developmental stages, how to match that up with activities. And she's been teaching gardening in Waldorf schools for 25 or 30 years. And then long ago, I did also write, along with Novella Carpenter, The Essential Urban Farmer. This you can use to prop a door open, because I don't know if it is useful for much else, but no.
Oh, I'm sure it is. Actually.
Oh yeah, it's got a lot of basics that are good for being productive in small spaces and dealing with urban context. So yeah, those are some suggestions, but maybe we can do some questions.
Yeah. So do we want to go to Q&A, or would we like to have a word from Marissa? Would now be a good time? We don't have so many questions.
There
you go.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, before I forget, I want to say that we will send you a follow-up email next week with this recording and a link to all these resources that Willow just shared with you. So if you missed it, don't worry. You'll get that information, and please share all of this, because the more we learn, the better the world will be. But I want to especially thank you, Willow. I first met Willow through City Slicker Farms when we first started doing our tours, and it's been really fun to watch this trajectory, and have been to the beautiful farm. I want to thank Anne Freiwald. I want to thank all the talented and devoted volunteers who stepped up to help Bagot reinvent ourselves during these dark days of the pandemic. So we are starting to emerge from our isolation, and we're hoping to offer in-person tours in the future, so you can actually get out to see some of these amazing solutionaries that we've been visiting over the past year. And this was the way we were able to keep in touch with all of you out there, because otherwise we couldn't. So we will be postponing Solutionaries Speaks programming until late fall. And then we'll return to Pie Ranch, where we filmed last spring. And after that, it was hit by the CZU fire. So we're going back to see how they're doing the restoration and speak with some of the Amamutsun tribal band there to learn a little bit more about the recovery efforts. So we won't be hearing a whole lot about this programming for a while. So please sign up for our newsletter, social media, anything to keep in touch, because we've all been isolated. This is a great way to keep connected. We've survived, we've reinvented ourselves. We're reaching more people around the world. There are people calling in from everywhere, and how wonderful that is. That's kind of the beauty of what just happened. And we've launched our Bag It Lens, which is our video team, and they've been doing a great job. They could be hired. They've been volunteering for a long time. And we also launched our virtual team building, which Anne has participated in. And I get to spend the weekend with Anne and some wonderful teachers this weekend, learning even more. So this is a critical moment for Bay Area Green Tours, because we're preparing for the future, possibly going back to doing live tours. So anything you could do to make a donation, we really appreciate it. And we're going to be launching a membership program soon, and also some other surprises. So please keep in touch. This is our mission. We love to connect people. We love to teach and share resources. And certainly these two women are two of the most valuable people that I really respect and have learned a lot from. So that's my little pitch there. Please look on our website, see if you can help support our future programming. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I feel like I'm on public TV. And you'll get that. We'll send you a Rudolf Steiner calendar. No, just kidding.
Great, actually.
Actually, that would be a good idea. We're going to start thinking about that. So I want to turn it back to you to continue the conversation.
We do have a couple of questions though, but if people want to just stay on a little bit over,
Yeah.
I think they're not, is that, you're good, Marissa?
I'm totally good. You came on earlier than I thought. So let you all continue conversations here.
Wonderful. So we just have a few questions. Let's see. So from Danielle, she asked, she'd love to hear more about biodynamics and permaculture, how it's becoming so popular today, and what do you think might prevent organic farmers from transitioning to biodynamics? What stands in the way, and what could facilitate that?
Okay, yeah, thanks for that question. That's great. In terms of biodynamic farming and permaculture together, I mean, they share so much. And so I've just seen them used in tandem. I mean, I think so many of the biodynamic farmers I know would consider themselves to be also utilizing permaculture practices and ideas and techniques and all of that. And I think they're just ultimately so essential, both, to be a part of it together and to be used in different contexts. Clearly, permaculture is less focused, I wouldn't say it's not focused at all, but less focused on the food production that is needed to feed the people who don't grow their own food. We live in a world where we're not, whereas a century and a half ago, 80% of the people were farmers. That is not the case today. And so we do need to feed the people of the world, and permaculture doesn't always focus in that area, and biodynamic farming does more focus on the production farming that's needed to feed people. But I certainly don't put permaculture in a box with that. I think there's a lot of great techniques coming out of permaculture. As we're going into global climate change, like we need to have food trees interspersed with row crops. It's too hot now. Like, let's get some shade in there, and do more interplanting. So I just think it's all fair game, it all works in different contexts. What might be difficult for people to transition, I guess, is, I would say the biggest barrier is capitalism, because right now farmers are shouldering the cost of producing our food to a great degree. I'm talking about sustainable farmers, but also, medium, large size, say organic growers in Salinas Valley. They are just inserted into a market model that it's a factory. Let's face it, it's a factory. It's not gonna be having any time or energy for looking at the ecosystem and all of these aspects we've been talking about. So, I think it really is a problem of our economic system and land access and all of that. So the way I see it right now is that in order to grow biodynamic agriculture, sustainable, meaningful farming, that could actually feed people, we are not going to be able to do it without gift capital. The profitable people in this world are amassing massive amounts of money that has no place to go except to do damage in our world, because we always need a return on investment. What really should happen is the excess money that is coming out of Silicon Valley or coming out of who knows where and just roaming around the planet hurting things needs to be directed towards solutions for the community. So I think, we all know that the way the economy is set up, a farmer can't even make a living. I mean, we barely survive ourselves, just, getting by every year. We feel ourselves very lucky to even have land or be able to do this, but it's, so I think that's the biggest impediment. The other one would be just learning, but if you start with organic practices and just add one thing here and there from the other parts of biodynamics, slowly you get into it. And I think that would be actually very nourishing for farmers, because farmers need to be growing as people too, not just be on the treadmill.
Yeah, probably land access as well. Access to farms. I feel so concerned that, two people, Bill and Melinda own 70% of the agricultural land in the United States right now. It's sort of, Lydia and I have this dream, just writing him a letter and saying, hey, can we talk to you about permaculture and biodynamics since you've got all this? Could we do some research? And, this could be really for you.
Yeah. I think that that's actually what we need to be doing, because unfortunately, these people have way too much power. So if there's any way that we could get their ear, it would be really great if we had a more decentralized system of economy, but we don't. It's very centralized. So if anybody can infiltrate and change hearts and minds of the people in power, we all want democracy. We want things to be decided from the bottom up, but that's not where we're at right now. So I would say trying to, really, what do they think they're going to do with their money when life is unsustainable on planet Earth? So I think we're at a moment where no holds barred, let's just try to be as honest as we can and be really we're not saying what we're saying to try to do anything bad to anybody. It's just, come on, this isn't going to keep going if you don't make a change. So talk to Bill and Melinda Gates. Does anybody know? Anybody who knows?
When I have that conversation, I'll be sure to invite a few people in.
Let's all
it's really important.
On LinkedIn, see if they write back.
Exactly. People, did we have other questions? Oh, there is another really good question. If people wanted to stay on, I like this one. I think it's the next one. It's so I'm thinking about messaging people and drawing people into this conversation. When you meet folks who aren't plugged into biodynamics, what kinds of responses do you get when explaining what you do? What's that conversation like? And what's been your favorite reaction?
I love it. Well, before I answer that, I did just want to mention, because I forgot to before, that we have an apprenticeship program. And if anybody wants to do biodynamics for a year, get in touch with me, Willow at willowvioletsummer@gmail.com. And Marissa, you're welcome to put that in the resources. I don't have a website because who has time, but email me or call me. So, and also we do have, people are welcome to come visit. If you want to come visit our farm, please get in touch with me. We'd love to have like-minded people come. This is land to share. It's not land for us only. So so I feel like when I talk about biodynamics with people, there was an era. So biodynamic farming came in right before we started moving into the 1940s and 50s, which was the heyday of materialistic scientism, when it was better living through chemistry. So the early biodynamic practitioners tried to mask the spiritual aspects in order to be able to even introduce it into the culture, because otherwise they would have been called the worst kind of names. And oh, I'm so sorry, my phone decided to ring, apologies. And so, they wanted to talk about the preparations as like BD 500 or something. You know, they gave him these numbers, right? So it would sound more scientific. That was then. And, you know, if we talk about the word esoteric, you know, it's not that we're trying to hide anything from anyone. It's just that people didn't want to know about it. You know, it's too weird, too weird. And so a lot of these things, the biodynamic movement had to start out that way, because in those times, people didn't have an idea of the Gaia principle. People didn't have any of these ideas of the ecological wholeness, you know, or the moon affects the earth. You know, this seemed to be so weird. Nowadays, I feel very unabashed about it. I feel like if it speaks to you, and this is what I say to my students, if it speaks to you, then you will be interested and you will want to learn more, and you might want to try out something. If you think this sounds so weird, I just think this is the weirdest thing ever, and it sounds like total hogwash, you know, we're not here to convince anybody. It's just like, what I find is when I started hearing about these things, my heart was like, oh my God, thank God. I've been waiting for a little bit of a unifying principle, because I can't seem to make the different parts of my life fit together, you know? And so that was my feeling. And I just think, you know, read a little about it, visit, see what it's like. And, you know, if it resonates with you, then you'll go further. And if it doesn't, no harm done, then that's not for you. There's other things to do. People often will talk about, oh, isn't it that thing where you bury the horn in the ground, the manure and the horn, and you bury it in the ground? And that's weird. That's fine. People can think it's weird, you know, but I think Steiner's ideas are really fit with a lot of other indigenous worldviews. He is not the only one who figured this stuff out.
Right.
It's just that Europeans have gone down a dead end path, and we jettisoned our indigenous wisdom, sadly. And so Steiner was not saying everybody should do biodynamics. He was given this for Europeans who were in a poverty of wisdom. But if you look at indigenous worldviews from around the world, all of these things are there in different forms. And so, you know, if you're thirsty for it, you'll find it. And if not, then we wish you well.
Yeah, I love that, Willow.
I don't think it helps to hide it.
No. And I think we'll send out a lot of resources. We can get our books together, and we'll send that out with this video for next week. And again, it's just, I love what you're saying, Willow. Just peek in a book, you know, just look at the Stella Natura, see what lights you up and what makes sense or what doesn't make sense, and you can get genuinely curious about, right? And then go dive a little deeper, as you said.
Yeah.
So I don't see any other questions. But just love having you here today, Willow, with us. I'm really excited to come up. I'm definitely taking your invitation to come up to Bodega and visit sometime soon, maybe bring my daughters. And with that, unless there's any other last questions in the chat, yeah, we'll send you all this conversation next week. And yeah, we'll all be in touch. Thank you so much, Willow, for your time. And thank you everyone for being here. And Marissa, do you have any final words?
No, I'm so happy to see some familiar faces, and thank you for your continued support. And I'm so looking forward to spending the weekend with you, Anne, and seeing you soon, Willow. Yes.
Yeah.
Some great.
Thank you, everyone.
Great community here. Thank you. Thank you.